welcome back to the Data Science Hangout. For anybody joining for the first time, I'm Rachel. This is an open space for the whole data science community to connect and chat about data science leadership, questions you're facing, and get to learn a little bit about what's going on in the world of data science across different industries too. And so these sessions are recorded and shared to the RStudio YouTube. So you can always go back and rewatch or find helpful resources or share with one of your colleagues as well. Feel free to always share this invite if there's someone across your team that you think may benefit from joining in the conversations too. We do also have a LinkedIn group if you want to connect with people after the fact. It can be a little bit easier to find each other in there or continue conversations. I'm sure someone from our team will share it in just a second in the chat here. But together, we're all dedicated to creating this welcoming environment here for everybody. So we love when everyone can participate and we can hear from you all. So no matter your level of experience or area of work, there's 3 ways that you can ask questions, and we'll remind you of this in the chat too. But you can jump in by raising your hand on Zoom here, and I'll just call on you. You could put your questions in the Zoom chat. And feel free to just put a little star next to it if you prefer that I read it out loud, if like your dog's barking or you're in a coffee shop or something. And then third, we also have a Slido link where you can ask questions anonymously. And I see Tyler just shared that in the chat right now. I want to keep adding this. I always frame this as questions, but if you also have something to add to a specific topic, feel free to use those options too, or raise your hand and jump in the conversation as well to share your perspective. But I am so excited to be joined by my co-host here today, Jessie Pluto, Senior Manager of EBI Strategic Analytics at Comcast. And Jessie, I'd love to have you jump in to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your role and maybe something fun that you like to do outside of work too.
Sure. Welcome, everyone. I'm pretty excited to be here. As Rachel mentioned, I am Jessie Pluto. I'm a senior manager here at Comcast. I work in our enterprise business intelligence department in strategic analytics. And my focus is really on video and content. And a big part of my job, I've been here for almost 5 years. And my goal every year has remained pretty consistent. Every year, I am really trying to save on the programming costs. So, as companies keep going through mergers, Viacom, CBS, comes Paramount, and these companies become bigger and bigger. They're losing advertising revenue. They're gaining some, a little bit of power in kind of the negotiations for how much they want to charge us for programming, which we unfortunately have to offset to the customer. Programming cost is the largest cost that Comcast has. It's outpaced even labor. And so really, I am trying to save, a couple $100 million here, a couple $100 million there, no big deal. Get to those B's every once in a while. And that's kind of been my main focus. I actually have a background. I studied psychology in undergrad, which is why I think I really like the behavioral part of this job, looking at, customer behavior, trying to figure out what programs do people really care about? What would people do if they didn't have this programming? And really, I kind of studied psych in undergrad. I did a master's certificate in applied statistics afterwards, got my foot in the door in a GIS job, trying to do some market research around where can companies, franchise restaurants really open up a new location that wouldn't impact sales to the existing markets. Worked for a brief period at a pharmaceutical research company before I came here to Comcast for the last 4.5, 5 years.
That's awesome. So casual. Save $100 million here and there. That's
there,
awesome.
No big deal.
Yeah, that's cool. One part of that question is tell us something fun that you like to do in your free time too.
Pretty basic stuff. I like to go hiking. I love to get outside. I live here in Center City, Philadelphia, so I do love to just get outside the city, get into a national park, lose that cell service, lose the Wi-Fi, and just go hiking for a couple days or a week here and there.
Nice. That's great. I always love seeing the pictures from our team when they go hiking and put them in the Slack channel to share with everybody.
Oh yeah, that's what I live off of.
So I know when we were chatting briefly ahead of the call, you mentioned you transitioned into people management a little less than a year ago, but I've been thinking a lot about like team building, community building, and being purposeful about culture. So I'd love to kick off the conversation with that while we wait for some questions to come in too. So I,
Awesome. Yeah,
yeah,
I
just
loved your
love
our
that
studio
idea.
talk, by the way, about creating, like being intentional about creating a sense of community. Like, how do you do that? I
Thank
worked
you.
very, very briefly in a restaurant in the front of house and realized that I was a little bit more comfortable in the back of house. But I understand the idea of like the touch and I did do customer service for many years before I transitioned to analytics. So I really feel like I kind of like took a lot of that where it's okay, like what are the, little things that I can do to try to be intentional about like what is the culture that I want to create here for my team. I do have the advantage of coming from I had a manager before I got went into people management who was just like an exceptional manager in terms of creating a culture that I really wanted to kind of almost replicate. And it's it's a lot easier to kind of like borrow than it is to create something from scratch. And so I really borrowed a lot from some of my previous managers. One of my big, principles, again, that I have borrowed from previous managers is this idea of one, recognizing false deadlines and not necessarily trying to hit these false deadlines if it's not necessarily something that's going to make a business impact, if it's not a business decision being made at a specific date, really kind of giving some flexibility to my team to, where there is value, investing the time. So that's one. And then just really like borrow often, share freely, take code that's out there, share code with other people, see how somebody else has done something in the past, and really try to kind of leverage what's already been done out there. I think that's been really helpful for, just kind of like building like a collaborative culture where it's like, okay, we may have done something for the first time, but we borrowed this part of it. So like, let's give a shout out to this person, let's put our code on GitHub. Let's go around to other team members and just kind of share what we did, why we did it, what kind of we learned throughout the process. Sharing that pretty frequently, I think just kind of allows us to kind of, just be open to this idea of collaboration. I might own this project, but there's no reason to be possessive of knowledge. Let's share that as often as we can. And that's something that I borrowed too from the R Studio community, just growing up in that community. Well, not growing up, but learning, getting into analytics in that community has been just such a great learning experience for what works. And then really it's just kind of like doing, I think like you said, like those touch-ins and trying to make sure that I have frequent, check-ins with my team and see like, okay, how are you doing? Are you stuck on anything? Do you need help? It can be very, very difficult, honestly, especially when you get a new team and you're trying to transition out of doing the hands-on work yourself. This is one of the things I struggle with the most is making time for the people on my team who need feedback, who need to be moving forward to be successful. And sometimes that is at the expense of, okay, I can't do my own code that needs to get done, but this is the right thing to invest my time in right now, is making sure that they can move forward and that they have what they need, that they are getting frequent feedback and exposure and all of those things. So just kind of, making sure that they have what they need and letting go of some of the, way that I have done things for, a few years.
I agree with Javier in the chat too. I love that. Like, no reason to be possessive of knowledge across teams as well. And so you mentioned like making time for the individuals that on your team to give them feedback. Like, do you have to like structure certain like office hours, or how do you handle that?
So I do have scheduled one-on-ones every week on Monday with my team, both down and upwards, just so that we can like make sure that we hit the ground running on Monday. And then throughout the week, we have a couple of other team meetings, like where we meet as a group, not necessarily one-on-ones, but I think during COVID, one of the things that we got used to, working from home is just the idea of, okay, we don't necessarily need to have time on our calendar. We don't need a daily stand-up on my team, but we need some sort of daily check-in where it's like, okay, Do you have what you need? Part of it is honestly just making sure that I am available, that I have time on my calendar, that I'm not completely overbooked to the point where if my team needs some feedback that I am not available for 2 days. That's not a good way to work. And so some of that is honestly just blocking out some time on my calendar and making sure that I have time every day that I can be available. And if I'm not, making sure that basically like when my team reaches out, if they have a question, that I am being responsive and kind of setting an example of I am going to make time for you when you need time, and everything else I'll push aside other responsibilities, other meetings. I can move those around to make sure that I am prioritizing you and your success. And I think it can be very I do like mentorship program for like big brothers big sisters as well, and one of the things that I learned through that is just how important it is when you first are matched with somebody in a mentorship role to be available, to just show up. And I think that especially when you get new teammates, new people reporting to you specifically, like it's so important in the beginning to just show up, to just be available.
Absolutely. I see Patrick, you have your hand raised. Do you want to jump in?
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And Jessie, thank you for doing this. And I've just absolutely loved everything you've said so far. So this is really good. I have a question for you about that prioritizing, blocking time on your calendar and prioritizing the mentoring part of your role. I completely agree. I tried to do the same thing. And I'm not sure if you're responsible for billing hours and things like that exactly, but I'm just wondering about how do you explain that up, right? How do you say, well, I don't have time to do this particular project because I need to protect my time for taking care of my staff. And again, I'm not trying to question that approach. I think that's exactly right. I'm just wondering how you justify it, I guess.
I'm going to go back to the beginning of my presentation. I'm in a very, very fortunate role where I have a small team and we make huge business impact, financial impact on the company's bottom line. And actually, believe it or not, it's quite an advantage for me because one, I don't have billable hours to deal with, and two, the impact that my team has, the impact of what certain projects, how certain projects can benefit the company, I think does give me a little bit more power than most people in a typical senior manager role with a new team at a large corporation like this maybe necessarily would all have starting out, where I can push back and say, listen, this project, this is a $250 million annual contract that we're working on right now. This is our main priority, and this is why it's important. And I don't really honestly have to, with my leaders, especially, like they know the value. And so I don't have to push them so hard all the time. I do have to be proactive. I can't just start canceling meetings that are on my calendar every week, the day of. I have to be proactive about, okay, here are the days and times that I am trying to be consistently available, trying my best, and it's not easy, but trying my best to manage across many, many stakeholders, not necessarily just the ones who, have all of the financial impact, but necessarily there's a lot of operational support that my team needs to provide, deadlines that we need to manage. And it is tricky, but I think that in terms of priorities, I do have a bit of an advantage where just the value is very clear. There's some operational things that I have to manage into my timeline, but usually we have a lot of lead time, a lot of awareness of what those deadlines are that makes it a little bit easier to manage. So not a great answer other than, I think I'm a little bit fortunate on that front.
Thank you, Jess. That really is helpful. And just recognizing the need to plan and build that into schedules going forward is really a useful answer. And so I do appreciate that. And I'll just say that you might be in a fortunate spot, but you're in a fortunate spot because you deliver value, right? So you deserve some credit for the fortunate spot you're in.
Thanks. I'll take it.
Definitely. Yeah. And being able to show that ROI that your team provides too. I think, Catherine, you had a similar question. I think you said maybe was answered in that, but just want to double check if there's anything you wanted to follow up in that question too.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great answer, Jessie. And yeah, you are in a fortunate position. And Patrick, you're absolutely right. You deserve to have that fortune. I was going to ask a follow-up question, but it looks to me like Frank has asked the question. So I throw the floor open to Frank.
I love it. We're all on the same page here. Frank, you want to jump in?
Yeah. The thing about being proactive, like Jesse, you said that you can't cancel a bunch of meetings like at the start of the day and make decisions and kind of jam everybody up. Can you talk about any of the tools that you use for communication, whether it's within your team, whether it is, what did I say, managing your calendars? I don't know, maybe it's Google or Outlook, that's the standard. And then of course, communicating insights. Like, how do you think about communication? And can you talk about any of the tools that you use that might be different than your typical Zoom, Slack, Outlook stack?
Yeah, I've tried so many tools, and the thing that I recently have kind of circled back to is just trying to keep it simple, stupid, you know what I mean? So like, it is mostly Outlook. There was a plugin. I hope we don't have anyone from Microsoft that I'll offend here, but I tried some Microsoft plugins. I think there was something called Viva that would like block focus time on my calendar. And it was constantly getting like overlapped with other meetings and just like not a convenience, like 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there. And like, that's not a good way, especially coding. That's not a good way to work. So I ended up just kind of literally, I planned it like a month ahead of time where okay, for this month, it is what it is. I'll manage how I can. I'm going to, reply tentative to the meetings that I don't have to be at. Unless somebody is in the invite saying, this is what I need you here in this meeting to do, I'll reply tentative. And, if I'm available, then I'm available. And if not, then, I might have something more urgent that needs my attention during that time. But it was like literally a month ahead of time. Okay, the Viva thing wasn't working. I'm going to block a big chunk on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays of like, heads down. This is the time that I'm available. My employees know that that time is I am available, and everybody else on my Outlook calendar sees me as busy. And then I make sure that I leave open time so people do have time to schedule meetings. Otherwise, they'll just start overlapping with other things. So it's really just trying to, a big part of it is really just learning how to say no politely. And so like replying tentative, and if somebody reaches like, hey, can you make it, just being able to very politely and nicely say, sure, I think I can make time, but can you help me understand like what you need my input on so that I can come prepared? Things like that, where it's just like, I think just like letting people know that my time is not endlessly limitless in terms of like I can be available whenever. And just kind of like setting an expectation that what can I help with, and do you need me there? And maybe I can send somebody else, or maybe I don't need to be on this one, but I need to be on the next one. And so it's just kind of planning ahead and, in the moment, just kind of being able to say no nicely, I think.
That's really helpful. And
yeah, sorry, I was gonna say on the tooling front, yeah, it's really just Outlook at this point. I use Jira mostly for project management, but it's really mostly just Outlook and Teams. So Teams chat, Teams meetings.
Yeah, cool.
That's helpful from the other perspective too, like thinking about the person scheduling the meeting to make sure that it's very clear in the meeting invite when I ask people to join, or if I put them maybe as optional so they know about it, that they know what their role in that might be. I see, Alan, you asked a question in the chat. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm just finding all the right buttons. Yeah, hi, Jesse. I think my question is kind of bouncing off what you mentioned about operational responsibilities. And I think that makes me curious if you can speak a little bit more about kind of the breadth of things that your team does. And thinking of operationally specifically, if you have any challenging balances of that work versus other work, and in turn, then if that influences the way that you describe roles on your team, knowing that you've got, a mix of responsibilities, or if you find that you have people who are really specialized and they fit in those niches really well. So yeah, that's a little bit of the sort of day-to-day and kind of big picture, work of the team that I'm really curious about.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned a little bit, but our big priority is really kind of predicting, okay, we have these contracts that are expiring in the next 12 to 15 months. It's coming up with some, we have like an analytics suite that, me and my team have developed. which basically predicts how many customers would, churn, drop video if we were to lose specific programming. It does a lot of additional like analytics in terms of just descriptives around what are the popular programs, what is the seasonality, the tonnage, like how much do people consume this, but then going beyond tonnage, like what do people actually care about? We really see that, people's passion is with, are you tuning in live to like House of the Dragon? You probably care a ton if you're watching that literally at like 9 p.m. sharp compared to, okay, you just binged, the last, I don't know, 8th season of Friends or something. You know what I mean? Like it's just different types of, the total hours might be the same, but it's not all equal. So I really enjoy that part of it. We spend a big part of our time producing that report, answering additional follow-up questions about, specific programming. There's a ton of, different like nuances with programming and viewing and what people care about. So that's a big priority. But a lot of our other, operational responsibilities line, okay, we have this contract that's expiring. And even if we're not planning to drop the content, we have to be prepared legally for if that situation were to happen where we don't come to terms. And so we have to have, list, strategic analytics. My team traditionally does not like to do a lot of operational tasks. We're focused on strategy, but viewing data is incredibly sensitive. So it's really just my team that has access to it. And so we do have to sometimes fill in a lot of operational roles in terms of preparing, making sure that the call centers know how many calls they should expect if we are to go dark on some programming, make sure that they have all of the customers, in the system tagged as like, these are the heavy viewers of this. These are the passionate folks that you should be aware of. App users if that were to go dark. So like some of that kind of, even we have a lot of like legal responsibilities in terms of like public access channels and making sure that we can provide the legal team with certain information about, what is the viewership of public access television and things like that, which is not necessarily strategic. It's required. And like we consider that to be operational. It's necessary, and because viewing data is so sensitive, my team is kind of responsible for most of that as well. Like I said, usually we have a lot of lead time with that, and so we can kind of plan. And we've really, in my team, invested a lot in what can we automate as much as we can. Take tasks that we do multiple times and just make it reproducible and as light touch as possible. We've kind of invested in making sure that we can do that easily, efficiently, and with as little time, effort as possible.
Cool. It's a domain I don't know anything about, so it's fascinating to hear like lots of activities that are familiar, but in a completely different, area of knowledge and expertise. So thank you. Yeah, really, really fascinating. Thanks.
Yeah, just to follow up a little bit too on your, how you actually like, I forget exactly, maybe you can help me understand what the question was, but like find talent or tailor the role to the expectations. I think you had mentioned, what was it? Yeah. Okay.
Sort of that balance of like analytical versus operational. It sounds like maybe it's not as much of a dilemma for you because so much of it sounds, at least a lot of it sounds like it's maybe similar activities, but in different kinds of like subject areas or maybe domains. But yeah, I was curious if that was a challenge for describing your role and being able to reliably give the work that you described in the job ad to the folks on your team.
I don't think it's a big challenge. I am upfront with people that, this is the part of the job that we have to do. But if you're somebody who likes doing a lot of different kinds of things, which you do have to do in this role, again, I think because the viewing data is so, limited in terms of access, a lot of times people on this team have to do, wear a lot of hats in terms of engineer, developer, like really look at things in terms of creative problem solving, because you don't necessarily have the same resources as you would on a team that has data that's, just available to everyone. So as long as people like to do different kinds of things, and again, I think that, I try to kind of phrase it a little bit more like, yes, we have these operational tasks, but one of the things that I personally enjoy, and I look for people who, also enjoy, like, how do I spend as little time and effort on that part as possible? How can I write an R function, a package, an R markdown report, whatever it may be, to just like get this done as quickly and easily as possible and not spend my time just doing copy and paste type coding. Nobody wants to do
Right.
that. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully the people I'm looking for don't really want to do that over and over again.
Right. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just have to ask, is there a show that you've been really surprised that people care a lot about?
Oh gosh, most reality TV, to be honest. It's like,
Okay.
wow, this one. There's quite a few shows. Even like you'd be surprised how much people watch, sometimes like the old westerns are still very, very popular, things like that, or
Yeah.
just even like Friends, like those old shows that just kind of have that, popularity, like the amount of time that people go back to it and watch it and spend on those things is always a little bit like, wow, that's shocking.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see, Tiffany, you asked the question, but there's a star, so I'll read it. But it's what is your typical schedule? Do you have times when you are trying to meet a deadline and have to work more hours in a week, or do you have a good work-life balance?
It's definitely gotten a lot better since I've gotten my team together. So for a while, I was kind of working independently on this, like the, content negotiation, content acquisition support. I was working relatively independently on it. And so, sometimes there would be like an actual hard deadline, not like a soft deadline, but like this contract is expiring in a week or 2 weeks and we need this information. And sometimes I did work late or work a weekend or something like that, or wake up at like 3 in the morning and get like an early start because I worked too much the day before. And a lot of that is honestly like I think that's just like how I am. Like I sometimes like I get curious to the point where it's like, no, I am going to solve this. Maybe something has gone wrong, like a server has gone down, or like a cluster has gone down, or something has happened, and I'm like, I'm going to get this finished. Like I think something that really helped me in my career is just kind of taking ownership of this project and really kind of like, I am going to deliver no matter what obstacles come in my way. And even though I think my leadership would have been much more understanding if I would have said, hey, there's this blocker, this isn't going to get done, I know I would have had support. I think there's like something wrong with my brain that just like, no, you're going to get this done. The stubbornness that I don't know is great, but I think that now that I have a team that, we have multiple people working on this, it's a lot easier for us, I think, to kind of spread the workload around. And I think I'm a lot more protective of my people's time than I am of my own. I started to realize that it's the same thing. Like I need to approach it in the same way. But my work-life balance, I'd say, in the last 3 to 6 months has actually really, really gotten to a really good spot.
That's great to hear.
It's nice.
I see, Brittany, you asked a great question in the chat. Do you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah. So to give you a little bit of context on my question, I'm an analyst, and what I'm trying to do is sort of help tool up other analysts on my team. So a lot of analysts use things like SQL, Power BI, those kinds of tools. And I've really seen a great need for maybe some like more programming type tools like Python and R and things like that. But of course, as an analyst, when you're working with business partners, you're just trying to deliver, value and insights in a speedy way, right? You're trying to do it as quickly as possible. And so I'm trying to sort of convince analysts maybe even take a little bit of a step back and learn and implement something new that can help them, both them and their business partners in the future. But I'm trying to kind of balance those two things. So do you have any advice for how I, as the person trying to sort of get these things up and running, can help to create more of that culture of let's go ahead and take a step back and do something now that will help me in the long term versus just trying, check boxes as quickly as possible?
It is a constant battle. And I feel like it is the place where like it requires some strategy because you can't do it all the time. You have to like really, I think, recognize when is the right time to pounce on an idea. You have to have the ideas. Sometimes you have to sit on them for a little while. And then you have to just be able to like recognize, I think, that opportunity. And sometimes it's okay to make mistakes. Like sometimes you push something too soon And, you know, it might hurt a little bit, but don't let that kill your motivation. I hate PowerPoint. Like, I hate copy and paste so much. I might have said copy and paste like 80 times already. I hope I didn't, but I hate it. And for a long time, you know, some of the reports that I was doing, like, just to give you an example, Paramount is like 30 individual networks. And so sometimes we're repeating views for, you know, 30 networks times like, you know, 5 different views or something as a bare minimum. It's too many slides, too much copy and paste. And I had made a, you know, push for, oh, we should convert this to Markdown or Shiny or something. And same thing. It's like, well, our stakeholders don't know how to use that. And like, it's a server, it's, you know, very private and for data, private customer information. And COVID hit and sports viewing kind of just went away. There's like COVID hit, pandemic hit, and we had so many questions coming in about what do we do? What's going on? What are customers doing? What are they watching? You know, all sports just kind of went, you know, completely off the air immediately. And I realized, like, this is my moment. I created a, you know, this is back, we were in Hadoop at the time. We've since moved, but we were in Hadoop at the time. I set up some like shell scripts, like bash scripts to, you know, run at certain days and like scheduled it and like created this like pipeline that I had been messing around with for a while, created an automated our Markdown report. And basically I was able to give the information that the business was asking for very, very quickly. And they learned how to use it because it's like they really wanted it. And it would have been too much for my very small team to be reporting every single week on like what is happening this week. It'd be a huge load on our team to do that every single week from scratch. And so basically kind of investing, and I will admit that I spent a little bit of night, you know, time on this project, but it was a passion project where I was like, all right, this is my moment to prove that like this is a feasible solution and show, because we had so many questions coming in. This was one of a huge backlog of questions. I was able to show that, okay, this is done. We've automated. We can use this for other things, for other questions that business owners want every single week, for data that they want every single week, and still have time left over for those ad hoc questions, those one-off things that are really important. We'll have time for that too and not miss the report. And so I think there's just this kind of strategy that you have to really kind of always be thinking about of when is the right moment to, you know, maybe not necessarily ask for approval, to just do something and show the value. And hopefully you have leaders who will support you in those decisions if it's the right one in the right moments. Because that's really, I think that's what I've been able to, those, I think, like little windows that I found to be able to kind of push some of the different tools that, you know, were not really, I think, supported in the beginning of my career here.
Awesome, thank you.
Absolutely love that answer too. Thank you. I'm just going through to see some of the questions over from Slido too, but Timothy, I see you asked a question in the chat. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just unmuting everything. Yeah, so it sounds like you're doing really interesting work over there. And if in my imagination, you have a suite of like dozens or hundreds of apps and reports, some of which are mission critical and all that. Do you have like a unit testing group or QA, QC process, dedicated process, or is it sort of just fix it when it breaks?
So my team doesn't actually, we do in enterprise business intelligence have a reporting team. Because the viewing data is sensitive, you know, sometimes my team gets into that, especially with the content acquisition work. Those contracts are also considered very sensitive information. So I, you know, some of that is like exclusive to my team, and we kind of like, again, I think I said like my team wears a lot of different hats. Like sometimes we get into the engineering space, sometimes we get into the data quality space. A lot of times we do even get into the reporting space. The COVID report, that was the solution that fit the question at the time. We didn't continue to support that. if that were to continue to be a, solution that needed to be out there, an app that needed to be out there every week for our business owners, it would actually transition to another team in EBI, the reporting team. So we do have, a whole team, data management, who does more data quality work and unit testing and, typical reporting, things like that, which, we don't take a lot of ownership necessarily on my team for long-term reporting or data assets or anything like that. We try to just be good partners, honestly, with that team. If we can solve something and hand it off, we try to do that. If we can collaborate and get a solution together that has some business impact, we try to do that. But we don't normally, strategic analytics really is more focused on, these are the questions that the presidents and VPs of the company are asking. How can we answer them? And then once it becomes more of a, even like a model, for example, we might build a segmentation in strategic analytics, but when it's time for deployment, we might hand that over to the data science team to actually, get into a good deployment, every month or week, whatever it may be.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to circle back to Brittany's question too on the culture of learning, because I see there were a few comments in the chat that I missed as well, from both Hugh and Marlene. So I was curious if either of you wanted to jump in as well. Marlene, it looks like you mentioned you're starting a group to unite data scientists.
Yeah, hi, Rachel. First of all, thank you to this group, not just the speakers, but although thank you, Jessie. I found all of the input that I've been getting from you. I've been here for about a month doing these Hangouts, really invaluable. So it's nice also just for the solidarity and some of the same issues we're getting. But I just want you all to know that your opinions and your experience matters, even to people like me. So anyway,
Thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, it really does make a difference. So I hope you give yourself a pat on the back for that.
And you too.
Yeah, so literally as of yesterday, I finally got the green light from our COO to start a data scientist and analyst group. Jessie, I'm taking all these mental notes as you speak about, kind of like some of the management and whatnot. I'm not an official manager of these people, but there's a lot of disparate systems and workflows in the organization. We don't have a common like data warehouse or single source of truth. We're a family of companies. There's 7 companies and we're all over the place. So part of this group is to figure out what people are doing, but also much to Brittany's point, like how do you get them to step back from the hustle and bustle of checking boxes, being more of like a compliance minded, I'm trying to just get these things done for my boss, into a little more of a proactive mindset, right? A little more intentional, I would say. And we're going to have these groups are going to be broken up into what I call show and tell modules. Well, somebody will literally just be able to come up and say, this is what I've done in Power BI. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. We just need to know, for transparency's sake, what people are doing. And then we'll also have learning sessions where somebody who feels like they have at least a periphery knowledge of a software or a tool or a programming language can show other people what it's capable of and what they've utilized it for. So as far as the time allocation for that, and Jessie, I hear you, especially when you're like, okay, I have to make sure I'm not so booked that I can't talk to my team, right? I'm very fortunate that my schedule is fairly flexible and I keep a certain block of time available in the morning. I'm going to make that open to the group to let them ping me for questions, but also just to connect them with somebody else in the group who's much more knowledgeable in what they need than I am, right? And I think right now we're shooting for every other week, Brittany. So, 1 hour every other week. If that's not doable, then there's something very, very wrong with their management, right? And I'm also willing to go to bat and start, duking it out with managers if I need to, in a polite and political way. But that there's no reason for anybody at any job to be, 8 hours a day, nose to the or pedal to the metal, just inundated with work, right? There's something wrong with how you're allocating your hours. And if you don't have room for improvement and or skill management or skill improvement, then you're going to be stuck in this rut. And that's when unhappy employees leave. So I want to avoid that. It's partially why I started this group. So there's my spiel, but thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.
That's great. And way to go on starting the group too. I know, Lisa, you mentioned you started a group as well. I'm curious if you want to share a little bit about what you're doing.
Sure. So I work at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, and I started in January, and I found it, as much as I love being remote, it was really hard to like get to know where all the sort of, I don't know, data and analytics folks lived, especially the ones outside of the data and analytics sort of larger team. So I essentially just like, as I started meeting people, was like, I'm going to do these meetups and I'm going to invite you, right? And so kind of started with this random group of like people I happen to have met. And then just recently started inviting all of data and analytics, so like 150 people, plus all the people I know who are outside of that group and who it's been forwarded to. And kind of like Marlene was saying, have used a lot of those ideas. So we've done a couple talks about data visualization. We actually had Marav, who just talked here maybe a couple months ago, come speak to the group. That was really cool. So like done some sort of teaching type things, and then I am going to have people start sort of sharing their projects as well. Yeah, it's been great so far. I love it. I'm biased, but
I love all this focus on, teaching and learning. It's awesome.
That's great. Yeah, kudos to everybody who's leading those groups too. I know it can be a bit of extra work too, and so it's nice to be able to celebrate them as well. I see our first actual anonymous question too, so I just wanted to remind people, if you do want to ask anything anonymously, you can use the Slido too. But somebody asked, it's been in the news that Netflix will start to crack down on password sharing soon. Have you tried to estimate this problem for Comcast streaming services?
I have not looked at that. I've been tracking that a little bit. I'm curious. I know there was some, I think they might have started that in some other countries. And I think they had they're starting to slow down on new connects from what I understand overall. So early information suggests that it could be bad for Netflix. I don't know what the impact on Comcast necessarily will be. I have not been asked that one yet, but I imagine I'm going to get that one soon. So thanks for the heads up. I might have to start looking into that early.
Dom, I see you also put a question in the chat. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I think you just already touched on this slightly, but just curious about your, workflow management, how your data teams work, how they sort of collaborate. I know you've touched on this, but just curious about your methodology and how you. Well, I'm just recently joined Booking.com, and we have like new intake and planning processes in place, and it's just really curious how you guys do it.
Yeah, I love talking about workflow. So just from a like where does work come from standpoint, like going to like the very, very, very beginning, we actually don't have a JIRA intake for it. So it's not like anybody can just submit a request and then all requests are treated equally. We, strategic analytics, like sometimes I describe it as like the internal consultants of Comcast, like we are in the meetings with, the president of content acquisition, the president of, products, of different services, of customer experience. Like literally we are in all of those meetings. And so we are able to kind of hear what are the questions that are being repeated over and over again. Where is the value? That's kind of like on my team to figure out what is the biggest value that we can add right now, what's most important. And we do get specific questions that we have to answer, but really the work is not coming from like a JIRA intake or anything like that. It's coming from, the business, decision makers throughout the company. And So that's kind of like how work gets prioritized. And then basically my team, we have most of the viewing data we just moved recently to AWS. Our data is in S3 storage. Not all of it, like most big companies, there's data in many, many places, and we have to join, cloud and on-prem and bring everything together. And, we do a lot of engineering to kind of set up, jobs that run, every month or so. And so that we have data available and ready to go for some of the reports that we do. And basically we'll do a bunch of aggregation in, Databricks, for example, in a Databricks notebook with Scala, or, maybe some Spark or something like that. And then basically, write out some data, and then from R, pull that data in, run a report. My team has recently started working. I think I mentioned before that I kind of was doing this mostly independently for a while. And so when I started working as a team, I was really excited to finally have the chance, like, we're going to work from a repo, like everything is in the GitHub repo. We're all like working, we started off just on like GitHub desktop, honestly, and, just working from the same repository all together at once. It's just like such a fun experience. And of course I messed up one of my, I messed up the first process, of course, which I actually felt really good that I was like, okay, both of my, new teammates did awesome. I screwed it up, and I got to kind of be the person who, made an example of what not to do and kind of communicate that. So I had such a fun time with that. That's kind of my new, I think, passion, is just like making sure that we all have like a good solid repo, that we're using proper version control and, contributing in that way. Because I just think it's such a better workflow, honestly, than what I had been doing beforehand, even though I was using packages and trying to kind of like standardize and make all of my code reproducible. It's different when you're doing it on a team. And I will say, like, if you haven't had that experience, it's definitely, scary, but in a very good way.
That's very interesting. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious how you like share those lessons of failure across the team too.
With a big smile, usually laughing.
Yeah.
Just like, of course it was me, I do try to have fun with it. Like, it is a learning experience. I think when I was earlier in my career, I was always so nervous of making a mistake, especially publicly, or God forbid, like as a manager with people who reported to me. It seemed like such a scary thing. And I don't know if it's just like years on the job, if it's just like the result of doing it many times. I don't know if it's just that I don't really have a good sense of like why I've kind of grown out of that, but I have grown out of that to the point where it's, I guess maybe it's just like having enough successes under your belt and having a reputation that you can, stand firm on. Maybe that's just it, but I definitely feel a lot of psychological safety, I guess, to kind of fail publicly, and hopefully nothing really, really bad has happened. Luckily, I don't work in medicine or anything where like lives are on the line. Thankfully, that's not the case. So, mistakes happen. I think that it's a good learning opportunity. As long as it's not everything that you do and you have a reputation as somebody who can deliver and, isn't constantly making big mistakes, I don't think you need to worry so much about it. That's not the thing that usually, from what I've learned, that's not the thing that people remember forever about you.
Yeah,
so
definitely
accepting it eventually.
I remember seeing on Twitter that in the like data community, there's this thing called, I think, data mishaps night, and a bunch of people just share these kind of stories with each other as well. I just lost my track of what I was going to ask you. Let me think of what I was saying. Oh, I was going to say, so moving into the new, like into people management, I imagine you have to think a lot more about hiring and growing a team. So I'm curious, like, any lessons learned there in terms of hiring and interviewing people?
Yeah, I'm still learning a lot of those lessons. I think I have been doing some hiring and interviewing, and it can be very difficult, I think, to, in such a quick, 30-minute interview or so, like really get to know a person. not just like in terms of their technical skills, but it is really, really, really hard, I think, to like look at a resume and to necessarily, get a good sense of like, is this the right fit? I think whenever possible, just trying to be more involved with the community and have that kind of, if you're not involved with Our Ladies Philly yet, I'll give a shout out to Our Ladies Philly. That's a great place to get involved. Even like the Our Studio conference. There's like lots of ways where I think I've been able to benefit from just already being in a community. I haven't necessarily had anything quite work out yet, in terms of hiring from somebody I've met through any of those events. But I do think that just being involved like that is, I don't know if it's going to work yet, but that's my strategy right now, is just kind of like some of the other things at my, in my career, just trying to take ownership of, okay, I'm not going to leave it all up to the process that exists in a large company, right? I'm not going to leave it all up to the recruiters on my team necessarily. I'm going to take some ownership and, get involved and talk to people and just kind of make those connections and trust that eventually that's going to be, a real benefit for hiring for me and my team.
That's great. Thank you. I see, Phil, you asked a question. I can read it for you. It's I'd like to hear more about how your strategic analytics group or role was formed. Was it organic growth from your solo work, or did Comcast open a new role or position?
So good question. Strategic analytics. So enterprise business intelligence at Comcast, I think, is like 7 or 8 years old. It's not that old. It's relatively new. It started with, I think, like 12 people or something. There's some folks who could give you a better history lesson than me, honestly. I'll have to refresh, but we grew really, really fast. And one of the big wins, this is before I was here, just to call that out, but before I was here, one of the big early wins that we had was actually this kind of work that I'm doing now. It's getting access to the viewing data was a big win. Getting involved with the president of content acquisition and building that relationship was a huge win, where we were able to very early in my department's history, like show a huge value to the organization. I've made a lot of changes to like, this type of work that we do, the type of analytics that we do. It's changed a lot since I started like 5 years ago. But in general, what happened was basically I was doing this content acquisition support as well as a bunch of other video and content support. And my manager was a very, very good mentor. And it was a team of 3, him and the other woman that I started working with on the team. They went and started their own team in the same department in strategic analytics, where they are completely focused on training new hires, on giving them cross training across all the different groups in strategic analytics. And so basically that kind of led me into this role where, okay, now I am leading the video and content team and doing all of that support and kind of starting my own team from scratch. Maybe not from scratch.
Yeah. How big is the team now, did you say in the beginning?
I have 2 people right now, and I am looking for 1 more.
Oh, awesome. All right. So you're hiring now. Feel free to share the link to the role in the chat as well.
Yeah.
What is that position that you're hiring for now?
Senior analyst.
Awesome.
Yes.
I can try and grab it in the the background as well and put it into the chat. I also just want to double check that I haven't missed anybody's question from the chat or Slido. So feel free to just like jump in or raise your hand here as well. Give people a few seconds here. And so Jessie, I know you were talking about like being intentional about building the culture on your team and like sharing data across separate teams as well. And like, I can't remember the exact phrase, but around knowledge sharing. So I was just curious, like, do the different teams within Comcast like get together to share projects with each other as well, and like teach each other how you're solving problems?
Yeah, we do projects together pretty frequently. A lot of times we'll team up. So, we have like a finance team in my department. And so like a lot of times we'll team up with the finance team. We actually just created a new team called Channel Analytics, coming out of the collaboration between the product side and the finance side. So we do a lot of, whenever we can, collaboration. Sometimes it's within strategic analytics. So like the domains where it's, product, finance, customer experience, all of those things. There's a lot of collaboration that happens there, especially even code sharing, where it's like, hey, I'm doing this project and it touches your domain. Can we just like do some code reviews and talk about, am I on the right path? Am I thinking about this right? What do you know about, your domain expertise that could help me with this analysis? And then, yeah, sometimes it does kind of develop into a whole new team, a whole new line of work that we need to focus on. And, that's a thing that happens pretty frequently for a pretty large company.
Cool. I see there was an anonymous question. I know we have a few minutes left here. And one was, do you have to handle salary negotiations in the interview process, or do you leave that to HR? And they were wondering, like, does it turn you off if somebody like asks for more?
It doesn't turn me off. I will say that I most of that is on HR. Most of that is not on me specifically. It's on folks that are in HR, and some of it is defined by the budget that is defined by my team and by finance, not just like my department's finance team, but like overall Comcast finance team. But for the most part, I do not handle too much of the salary negotiations myself. Thankfully, I'm very thankful for that, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't always sound like a fun part of it. But Marlene, I see you also asked a question in the chat. You want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. The question is just around, this one is still a struggle for me, Jessie, is documentation, right? Because there's always the handover to new employees and you can't remember what the old employee had in place or why it's there. Or when you're implementing something new, everybody's really excited and guns a-blazing to get infrastructure up and running, right? All those pipelines and whatnot. But then how do you handle documentation, making sure people follow through with that the metadata is well documented as well? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, my team, I'm fortunate my team is small, and because we don't have too much ownership of like the actual data as a data product, like the viewing data necessarily, we don't have to stress documentation too much. I do try to just like be better, especially working as a team. I'll be honest, I was terrible when I was working mostly independently. I've been trying to be a lot better now, just like having a team, working as a team, commenting code, pushing updates to GitHub every time I make any updates, things like that. But in terms of like actual documentation of workflows, we don't do too much of that on my team. I think it's a huge amount of overhead, and we're more focused really on being fast and effective. And when there's larger projects over a longer period of time, honestly, just making sure that it's reproducible, less so than documented, because it's not like anybody can come in and access the viewing data. That's not something everyone can do. So we haven't yet grown to the point where that's really important for us to spend our time on.
Okay, thanks.
Brittany, I see you just commented into the chat too, if you want to jump in. I like the idea of this documenting party.
Yeah, so like my team, we've got like 5 analysts, so we're a little bit of a smaller team. But one idea that I've always kind of floated around with is like doing something like that. I know that I try to do that even in just my own general workflow of like Fridays are really more cleanup days than anything. But I haven't really tried it with the team where we all kind of get together and we document and we show each other our code. Especially, I think that's helpful because as the person writing the code, sometimes it's hard to know like what to comment and what not to. But just as like another kind of, hey, we're all in this together, we've all got to do this. and making it a little bit more fun rather than like, oh, you have to do your code in Git, otherwise you're horrible, terrible, whatever. So yeah, but I can let you guys know how that goes. If it goes well, if it doesn't go well, just I'll keep y'all updated.
Yeah, one thing I guess
awesome.
we do have a blog post that we have internally that is, hosted through, I think, GitHub pages. But we do, if we figure out like a new way to move, I think I saw a question come in the chat about like, are you in the cloud or local? And one of the things we had to figure out when we moved to Databricks is, okay, how do we move data from, a cloud location to an on-prem location? And so we figured out how to do that. And then, just kind of like writing a script that's well commented, posting it on the blog, sharing it around with the team. So like things that do impact, more throughout the organization, we do try to kind of put some documentation together for that and post it on the blog post. Right now is kind of the place where we're putting it. It's been GitHub before. It can be a very casual, hey, look, I did this thing. If anybody is interested, I'm going to go at lunch, or, Fridays, same thing as like Fridays usually a day for kind of sharing information. On Friday, I'm going to like, show everybody how I did this. So it can be pretty, posted on the blog, or a little bit more of a casual thing.
Awesome. I know we just hit the top of the hour and a few people have to run, but I think you just answered Javier's question there, and that most of what your team's doing is in the cloud today.
We do some stuff locally as the last step for some reports where we're pulling in data from the cloud. It's already aggregated. Most of the processing happens in the cloud, but sometimes we do use our local R every once in a while.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jessie. It's been really fun getting to learn about the ways Comcast is using data, and also how you're building that culture and showing value on the team. If people wanted to connect with you, I did share like that Our Ladies Philly group in the chat, but is LinkedIn the best place to connect with you?
Yeah, Twitter, LinkedIn, Our Ladies Philly, Twitter, all of those are good.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for all the great questions too. I feel like there was so much energy here today. Really, really appreciate you all being here. We'll be back next week, and we'll be joined by Marcos Huerta, Manager of Data Science at CarMax as well. So hope to see you then. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Rachel.